has no clue about how much public subsidy goes into highways and private transportation. We've done a terrible job of creating the evidence for mass transit.
And the big problem in the U.S. is we're always looking for a quick return on investment, a couple of years, or the next election, and we're not looking at what the long-term. And if we actually used that kind of return on investment view, we would never educate our children, because the return on investment is decades. And really, and that's how you need to think about infrastructure, because it is decades.
Will Rogers said, I think we'll be the first country to go to the poorhouse in the automobile.
And Winston Churchill said the Americans always do the right thing after they've done everything else. Comments from the group? Questions, please? Anybody? Otherwise, I'll come up with another one of my own. All right, you guys are arguing for the nanny state, and you just want government to meddle in people's lives. And you're in front of the hearing, the TV is going, and you cannot give a long answer. So how do you deal with this challenge that you're really just trying to meddle with people's personal choices all the time, and you're against personal liberty? You're un-American.
I advocate for narrative. Sorry, I think that the power of the oligarchs have to rewrite. We can work all day long to get the greatest farm bill passed, and they will just start the next day working on the rules committees. We got to hit business, large, highly processed food in the pocketbook.
And the craft beer strategy.
Change the story we tell ourselves. Not that we shouldn't focus on policy, but the real action to me is changing the story.
The narrative matters. What are the stories we tell?
I know I've been called un-American before, so. In fact, it's quite the opposite. We're not taking personal choice. We're giving room for people to practice their personal choice. When you have someone that is living in a neighborhood that cannot even step outside, then that is no longer freedom. That is not democracy. There is no personal choice. We're saying, let's level the playing field and let everyone have the luxury of doing what they let them live in a neighborhood that allows them to do what they want. And when they don't practice that, then yes, now it is your personal choice to be obese or have diabetes. But if you are depriving them from any chance to improve, then this is not their personal choice. You're dictating how healthy they're going to be.
I always feel that every time you see somebody on a bicycle, they're smiling, at least most of the time. And I think that if you deprive people of the ability to safely bicycle, you're depriving them of life. That is, you live longer if you exercise. Freedom, liberty, because they can't go about it because they're depending on cars and whatever. And happiness. And what could be more un-American than deprive people of those three? So, bicycling is as American as can be, I would argue. Ray, you got a comment?
Well, I'd like to mention the term social equity. It's kind of dangerous because it sounds like socialism. But the thing is, 30 to 35% of the people in your community do not have a driver's license, either because they're under the age of 16 or they have a disability or they're elderly or by choice. As we're hearing now, by choice, young people are choosing not to drive or have cars. So it's a social equity issue when you design communities for pedestrian use. A lot of people, I can't tell you how there's some kind of this weird reaction that a lot of, not all, but maybe 1 or 2% of drivers had, that they just hate bicyclists, like they're offended by them or something. And, that little strip of bike lane and that sidewalk, that's for 30 to 40% of the community, and not to mention everyone else that would enjoy using it. So I try to bring that fact up.
It actually makes driving easier when you've got that green bike lane, because it sort of separates it out, because the bicycle is supposed to stay there. By the way, the biggest pain in the rear end, I'm being videotaped, in LA are the hotshot bicyclists that insist they're going to hold on to their full lane, and they can get up to 30 miles an hour, but they can't get faster, and the cars are running behind them all the time. And they generate more backlash than they generate support. Dan?
I would just say that Houghton, Hancock, and actually sister city up, mining town.
Yeah. Calumet,
and Detroit, compared to LA, we're bike meccas because we don't need no stinking bike system. We got all these streets and no traffic. So I'm sorry, they're pretty safe. Compared to LA. But that wasn't my point, sir.
Margaret
My
Newman.
point was, I did have a point. And that is, I got in this online argument with a gun guy when he suggested that I was blaming guns for murders, and it would be like blaming cars for drunk driving, which I said, exactly, I do. In America, if you look at urban development patterns in places like, I sent my high school senior daughter at the time over as a senior in high school to Eastern Europe, and she drank every day during high school. And it couldn't have been any better because nobody drove. They never drank more than one. They got on their bus and they went back to where they came from.
And maybe talk to people.
It is, all these things are connected.
Margaret.
So my question is, Dr. Mami, you brought up the idea of zip code as a kind of predictor of health, long-term health. But the other part of that is that the reason that zip code is like that is because of economic inequities, and those communities are places where people don't have jobs, and you could probably predict it based on lots of other factors. So I guess my question is, and this is for, because you're all talking about sort of issues of equity in some way, how do you implement changes in those communities so that, I mean, if you want a grocery store in a place that doesn't make economic sense for, a business to open there, how do you have to subsidize it? If there's no public transportation, then people have to own cars, but they can't afford so there are all of these kind of linked problems. So I'm just, wondering what your thoughts are on that piece of it.
But I think we need to this hasn't always been the trend. 40 years ago, some of the lowest income neighborhoods in this country had pretty healthy diets because people grew their own fruits and vegetables in the backyard. So we got to reconnect with those traditions in part. And in part, I don't know if you shared the numbers, but top quartile, 1/7 the amount of, 7 times more fresh fruits and vegetables than the lowest quartile. And there's a lot of sticky issues to unpack here. Meat perceived as being wealth. There's a lot of issues, but the good news is that it once always wasn't that way, and we can go back to those times. I don't think we're going to necessarily change the economics of grocery stores. We got to change people's stories across incomes.
The zip code, not only as a physical zip code, as in the place or its relation to design. If we take the zip code as where people exist and the interaction and what that zip code would imply on how they're going to live. So the environment as a physical place is one piece of why place matters, but also poverty, the kind of job you have, your access to services, and they're all connected. You cannot separate one from the other. Absolutely. And then add to it racism, regardless racism because of color, but you have racism as classism, you have racism because of sexual orientation, country of origin, religion, whatever you want. So discrimination, add to it, then it becomes a confounding factor. But let's analyze it down. If you have a education, let's take a neighborhood in Detroit, and you guys know the history of Detroit and what it's going through now, and the comeback that we're trying to come back and all that. But it's not a secret that there has been a lot of schools that closed. So we're not only talking about access to education, but we're talking about access to quality education. And if you have quality education, then chances are you might go to college. If you go to college, chances are then you fit in a certain economical bracket, you might get a better job. That better job is going to give you access to a better neighborhood to live in, maybe, or a better job that you can afford insurance, then it's access to health care, and then it will not only affect your health, it will affect your child's health. And we had so many studies that linked infant mortality, not for the 10 clinical causes that we study in medical school. Infant mortality can go back one generation before when the mother was still a child. And this is where it's a complete and comprehensive approach to exactly what Ray is saying about social justice and social equity. It is beyond disparities in health. It's disparities in everything, whether it is jobs, employment. You can look at gender equity, for example. If for every job a man holds, a woman gets for $1, a woman gets 73%. We did a health impact assessment, and that 30 cents less can make truly a change in not only her life, but also the life of her unborn child.
So, I mean, California, we now do cap and trade. It generates $800 million a year in taxes on the big utilities. 20% of all that money's got to go to the poorest communities, and it's about empowerment of the communities. And what you really need to invest in is mothers. The second big thing is, and this is for the architects, housing matters. So when Jerry Brown was mayor of Oakland, they built 10,000 two-bedroom condos. It was not great because a lot of people needed a studio or a one-bedroom condo, and some people needed 3 bedrooms. And so the uniformity of this really was a big problem. There wasn't creative architecture as this was being done.
I was just talking to the fashion district director in Los Angeles over the weekend. 30,000 new units being built in one neighborhood on the outside of downtown. Not one affordable housing.
Absolutely right, and that's where I was going.
It's just,
And when you intersperse affordable housing in, the kids in those homes do better.
Yeah. To me, we have to, again, do a better job of arguing good policy. And in terms of social inclusion or social equity issues, we have to quit arguing that it's the right thing to do. It's the freaking smart thing to do. We can't afford to put 20% or 2 million people in prison when half of them shouldn't be there, but for any other way to deal with their homeless able or their recreational drug issue. I mean, on and on and on.
So I'm going to need to ask for wrap-ups. Are we okay, Jeff? We're okay. We're a bit over, but I'm going to, okay. Oh, all right, so Ian.
Hi, so this question's for, I suppose, all of you. As far as, since you all had some very good takeaways, what would be the top one that you believe each of us as individuals can bring back? And then also, what's the biggest thing that we can do as a gathered kind of community from this summit? That second one might be a little bit big, but that's...
All right, I think, well, that was a good closing question, so let's do it. What is the big thing? I'm going to get to go last.
You know, I don't think this is a new idea or anything, but it's, for me, the importance is that, and you might call it social engineering or social architecture, but it's the idea of the mixed land use and the new urbanism kind of thing that a lot of you are familiar with maybe in design, is that if I could, you know, throw out the old zoning and the suburbs and the inner city and the rural, but to have a place where I can live in a neighborhood and work there and, you know, shop there and worship there and have neighborhood schools there, and then have a diversity of people and points of view that I'm exposed to. I think it's kind of reinventing democracy in a way. So, I mean, I'm interested in that mixed land use idea.
Wonderful.
3 times a week, have dinner with your family, and once a week, invite some friends over to share that meal with you.
I cannot top that, I guess. I think we as Americans have a short attention span, and exactly. And we like buzzwords and we like the hype. If you guys remember, 10 years ago, it used to be cultural competency, and everybody was cultural competency this and inclusion and diversity and blah blah blah. And I don't think we went anywhere with that, except we have now languages, different languages in science. I think disparity is the new buzzword, and it's the new hype, and equity is how we're going to fix it. But I don't think anyone is putting enough effort to seriously fix it. I don't have a magic answer, and I don't think it's a button that you can push. But I think if we start framing everything in that lens, and we start using that language more, then it might move from becoming a hype among a certain society or certain people, rather than a practice where everybody is practicing it. And it's not an easy way, because you are talking about every sector that touches your life. You're talking about health, you're talking education, you're talking policy, transportation, food, produce, everybody. In order to bring all those in and let them get together and decide on an action, it's going to be very tough.
I deliberately asked it was interesting that the youngest person in the room was also the best dressed, so I really want to thank you, Ian, for that comment. I have great hope in the young people, and your understanding of the horizontality of the world. You're used to having the world's information at your fingertips, and in our generation, the generations before, everything was so stovepipe, we did not see that it was all connected. And I'm not sure what the future is going to look like, but all I know is looking in the past, so the next generation is going to look, what the hell were you people thinking that you were destroying the atmosphere with enormous amounts of greenhouse gases? We have got to think about solutions that fix multiple problems. And the solutions that fix multiple problems that reduce carbon dioxide loading and preserve green spaces and forest land is to create quality urban density. And quality urban density requires good architecture, good insulation, good sightline, good aesthetics where people want to be. And when we create that, by the way, walking up the stairs is a very good step in doing that, since about 10% of the energy in a building is going to the elevators, and is a way that really thinking about the physical construct of where we live can really improve health, economy, and frankly, the viability of the United States, because if we don't, we're toast. So with that, let's, we have one more break, or Jeff? Go ahead, thanks.